Jumping straight back into the action here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Like I said before the break, we're going to go all the way back to the Brazil game. A great game, a fantastic game in South America for the NFL, but a 34-point win for the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, they put up 34 points. They didn't win by 34 points. Against another great NFC team. It didn't tell the whole story, though, I think, for a lot of people that have dissected it a little bit more, and it has been brought to my attention now. Obviously watching the game, but I think it's become more of a bigger topic as the days have gone on. Obviously, Saquon's performance stole the show in the end. 3 touchdowns in his debut with the Eagles. The way that he ran it, fitting seamlessly into this team. It looks like he's been there his whole career, but that was the main grab of everything, right? That's what everybody gravitated towards, but there have been some concerns, if you weren't watching the game or anything like that, with how Jalen Hurts performed at certain points in this game that I think people and myself now, looking at it a little bit more in depth, have started to pick up on, and I wanted to bring it up here to get your guys' thoughts on any of these concerns, right? Because you look at Jalen Hurts and how he played against the Green Bay Packers. He finished 20 of 34 for 278 yards with 2 touchdowns, but also 2 interceptions as well. If you remember those interceptions, it's not like it was a crazy tipped pass or anything like that, or just a great interception just in general by the opposing defense. It was 2 very poor decisions that led to those interceptions. You look at the first one, just backed up against his own end zone, very basic route combination, I think just 4 verticals going up the field, and Jalen, just for whatever reason, throws it right down the middle into like a sea of Green Bay Packers defenders. Xavier McKinney just drifts over, picks it off, and that's the first one, right? They were fortunate not to get scored on by a touchdown off of that chance. I'll get to that a little bit later, but the second interception, they were in the red zone this time, and Jalen Hurts kind of drifts right, starts running that way, looks back across the middle of the field, and throws just a lollipop into the end zone, where, again, easily picked off by Jair Alexander, and the Eagles just completely throw away an opportunity there to at least get 3 points and make this win a little bit more convincing. But again, with that interception, with the first one, 2 bad decisions by Jalen Hurts, and I think that, along with some other throws that I think Jalen Hurts would like to get back in this game. You look at the decision-making on some of them. There was a play, I want to say in the second half, where just simply A.J. Brown tries to run a slant route. Jair Alexander's all over it, just basically beats him to the spot, gets in front of him, and A.J. Brown sort of stops on that slant path. And Jalen Hurts, I think the timing of everything with the route, supposed to go to A.J. Brown, just throws it anyway, not really going through his progressions or turning away based on the fact that Jair is already in front of AJ. He still throws it, and Jair almost intercepts his second pass of the game. That's one throw. And then another one, again in the second half, a quick just throw to the flats for Jalen Hurts on the left side. And again, another defender was very close to it. And if you quickly look at it, you know, the defender's sitting right there. Maybe you go through the progressions and just not throw it. But I think a lot of times with Jalen and going through the timing of everything, wanting to get everything in order and know where the ball's supposed to go, with the timing and stuff like that, you look at who you're supposed to go to and you don't really pay attention to everything else. He throws it anyway, and it's almost a pick six going the other way because the defender's sitting right there, right? It's not a positive play. You gain negative yards, and again, you're lucky that it wasn't returned for an interception. So it's things like that and other decision-making, plays where on an option route, he decides to keep it where he should have let Saquon run it. All those little things like that might not be eye-catching as soon as you're watching it. It's just another play. They'll go through it, and the game keeps moving on. But when you dig into it a little bit deeper, it becomes a bigger conversation, right? When you're talking about the Eagles and their aspirations for this year, right? Once you see things like that, it might frustrate Eagles fans, and then you start thinking, oh, well, if they were playing like the 49ers or the Lions or something like that, this would come back and bite them. And that's where this topic about these concerns start to get a little bit more significant with Jalen. It's only 1 week. I don't want to blow this up any more than it is, but all teams have their struggles, but I feel like it is something that should be acknowledged and shouldn't be clouded by the scoreboard and just think that the Eagles won and everybody played great. It all comes relative to how they played, and I think with the Eagles, you just realize that Jalen didn't have a good game, but you're very fortunate to have guys like Saquon, AJ, Devontae, and a good defensive performance that I will get to in just a little bit. And sticking to Saquon with this whole situation with Jalen and how now going forward you can try to help him improve on some of these decisions. That's where Saquon is massive for this offense, right? Because he can take over a game like we saw, right? In the red zone, they're going to be more efficient. In the passing game, protection, whatever you'd like with Saquon, he is as close as you can get to a complete running back. And I think he can come in, alleviate some of that pressure from Jalen and take over a game where Jalen isn't forced to kind of throw himself out of the game, basically, right? If they're down or something like that, or their offense is struggling, he doesn't feel like he needs to throw the ball to get them going. Hand the ball off to Saquon. Very safe play overall, generally, and Saquon can get and do the most out of the opportunities that he gets. He usually does. With the great offensive line that they have, they could just hand it to Saquon like 8 times in a row, and they're going to be pretty successful overall. So that's one thing, and plus you throw in the matchup nightmare that he is. You saw it on the first touchdown that he caught, a wheel route out the back of the backfield towards the left side, going up, catching it like a wide receiver, almost over 2 guys. That's insane for a running back, and then you think that was caught on like 2 DBs, if I'm not mistaken. And then if you ever get him on a linebacker, that's a very favorable matchup for the Eagles as well. So those are the things that Saquon brings to this offense that will make it a little bit easier for Jalen to not maybe make some more intricate decisions where he just feels like he has to throw it or it's supposed to go there, so we're going to force it there. With Saquon, I think you can make it a little bit simpler for Jalen in this regard. And also, speaking of making it simpler, I think Kellen Moore did a great job calling the offense as well, kind of pointing out what the opposing defense was doing with some shifts, some pre-snap motion, a lot of motion actually, in the shotgun, under center, things like that, that once you get a little bit of motion going, you see if a defensive back follows you, or your receiver, I should say, and you can kind of understand that they're in some sort of man, some sort of zone, and then you can make it, you can take away almost a step for Jalen Hurts, essentially, right? Knowing that it is man or it is zone, and making it a little bit easier that way for him in that regard. And also, then you start thinking about what I mentioned before, right? This worked against the Green Bay Packers, right? But is this going to work against other more experienced defenses, I could say, experienced in bigger moments, I should say, like the 49ers, like the Lions, I guess, just off the back of this year? Can they get by with an okay game from Jalen Hurts, with Saquon Barkley playing very well in the playoffs, so to say, in this scenario? And that's where finally, I mentioned before, the defense. That's where the defense comes in, right? I think they also can play a pivotal role and kind of hiding the fact that Jalen isn't necessarily taking over a game, isn't orchestrating a game, but when the defense is able to lock everything down and sort of bend but not break once they're in the red zone, I think that's huge, because if you look in the Packers game, not only did Saquon complement Jalen and make it easier for him, but this defense really allowed, Green Bay to drive down the field, potentially get into the red zone, and they just shut everything down, only allowing field goals rather than touchdowns. You look at that first interception, right? Terrible mistake by Jalen Hurts to give the Packers field position essentially 10 to 15 yards away from the red zone. The defense locks everything down. They hold the fort, so to say, and they only give up 3, where really they probably should have given up 7. If one of those field goals where the Eagles defense didn't lock everything down, if one of those field goals turns into a touchdown, with how Jalen Hurts played with those 2 interceptions and some questionable mistakes, Green Bay probably ends up winning this game, and then this massive game from Saquon is almost thrown away because Jalen becomes the story, right? He becomes the problem, and it becomes even more of a headline everywhere. But that's where I think some of these weapons now, with the Eagles having the luxury of having such a talented roster, can kind of mask these mistakes right now. They're talented enough to get by most of their schedule, I would probably say. Most of their division, certainly. They're better than all those teams in their division. They're more talented, at least, I should say. So they're going to be too talented to not put up points, but I want to see a scenario where maybe the defense is giving up those touchdowns, and then what happens when you find yourself trailing in a game, right? You necessarily don't want to run the football. Saquon kind of gets taken out of the equation, and now you rely on Jalen to make those throws, to kind of decipher defenses on his own, make the right read, call out the right pressure, the right formation, and everything like that. I want to see Jalen in those situations. It didn't work out great for him, but they got the win in week 1. So that's the most important thing right now. We have a lot of time for these things to work themselves out, but that is where I want to see it, right? Where everything's even. Both defenses just can't stop the opposing offense. Offenses are going back and forth. Talent out of the stadium. The difference is going to be the quarterbacks. Which quarterback can make the right read, make the less mistakes in the game. And unfortunately, if Jalen, can't improve on this, it's going to be very obvious when he does become the issue, if that ever gets to it, and he makes a mistake, he makes the wrong read. And for as talented as the Eagles are, if they find themselves trailing and Jalen can't, necessarily bring them out of that or make the necessary throws, then there's going to be a bigger discussion about, how Jalen might not be the right quarterback, or has he developed enough? Is he considered one of the best quarterbacks? All those sort of things will come up if and only if we get to that point, but we're still a long ways away. But it is something to at least acknowledge right at this point. The Eagles looked near perfect. Their defense played great. They won the game, put up a bunch of points, but there is always something to work on, and especially at the quarterback spot. It is something that Jalen will have to improve on. I have confidence in him. I'm a fan of Jalen Hurts. I believe that he has everything to be a top quarterback, but there's that one little thing that you still need to see get a little bit more refined as we go on. But speaking of going on, we have some more topics to get to on today's show. Looking at the Steelers, now going into week 2, probably starting Justin Fields, we look at a situation where their main target was George Pickens, but he's going up against Patrick Surtain. The outlook on that matchup, what does George Pickens think of that, and do they have enough outside of George Pickens if he's not as impactful as he was to win this game, and what kind of effect could that have on Justin Fields in this game as well? We get into all of that after this break. We'll be right back.